being more aggressive, coercive, controlling of the other. That sort of domestic violence is not just about between men and women. There are, sort of men tend to be more violent and aggressive in it, but there's women who are very controlling and manipulative and coercive of their male partners.
And some are also violent.
Yes. They're just not likely to kill their partner.
So one of the issues that comes along with that is that there are some people who've experienced childhood trauma who have suppressed the anger and rage about that, who then project it onto their partners. And, rather than internalising, which at times tends to be a common one. And the other factor there too is that in some relationships, gay relationships and transgender relationships, there is also the propensity to use drugs and alcohol in a way that it's not healthy. Now, heterosexual people do that too. I mean, if I go broad-based in our community, for example, here where we live, we have a very, very, very high alcohol consumption. If I get 5 referrals for anxiety and depression, if I get 3 of those 5 to stop drinking and taking drugs, their clinical symptoms almost disappear. They start to sleep better, they're emotionally more regulated, they're more structured, they're clearer in their thinking. So the whole lifestyle thing becomes really, really important. So when I talk about this stuff in terms of domestic violence and sexual consent, and consent is blurred when we're intoxicated, and it goes both ways. And then when you add on to that the dominance and control in that situation for whatever reason, whether that's intrinsically, psychologically part of you, or whether it's both your intrinsic predisposition but also the cultural dominance of that, it becomes a volatile mix.
That's why I said in the beginning, is like domestic violence comes in all forms, right? Like
absolutely.
There's many forms. It can come from the male side, it can come from the female side, it can come, there's so many, it's a bigger picture, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But statistically speaking, men tend to weigh heavily in that, we tend to do that stuff more on a physical violence side than women. Because, I mean, let's face it, I'm probably twice the size of my wife, and you haven't seen me, but I'm 6'3" and I'm about 250 pounds, and so I'm like a blocker in a football team. So when I worked with men who were domestically violent, not one of them would ever think about tackling me. And it was really interesting because a lot of those guys actually never had a fight with a male, but they would attack their female partner. And it's that internal, because deep down they're afraid and they don't know how to express themselves, so that frustration overlays the capacity to regulate what they're feeling. And you add alcohol to that and it's like, we've got an explosion.
And then I think, specific to that question, in communities where people have had to really go through a lot of emotional trauma to be the person they wish to be the person they need to be, then, they've often been quite emotionally traumatized. And there's a lot of distress and anger. And in relationships in the wrong, it can become really quite difficult for people to control themselves, especially, yes, if they're using intoxicants, but if they're under any sort of emotional strain. And in today's world with COVID, with people locked down, I don't think it matters whether people are, what gender people are. They're at risk if there are background traumas and stress that are left them vulnerable, to either being the one who is the perpetrator or being the victim of that,
Yeah. And I mean, that also includes financial stress. How many people have lost jobs, homes, both in the United States and in the UK, homelessness has really seriously increased. Why? Because we have an economic system that easily disadvantages people who are in the gig economy, right? You don't have any, superannuation, no health fund, nothing, and then suddenly, because of this thing called COVID, you're out of a job. What happens then? And so all of that comes into the mix.
It's all, it all goes back to also like just mental health and how we don't address that. All of that tied into when you don't know what to do with that anger, and all you've ever seen is your dad, or somebody in your family beat somebody, and they didn't do, and you saw the cycle, but you don't know how to deal with your emotions. When you have stress, what do I do when I have stress? Don't take it out on other people. You know what I mean? It's like learning these things, going back to the arts, going back to the whole, meditating and taking time and self-nurturing, things that we're not taught. And actually that's something huge that Ashley has been teaching me, is that self-nurturing, and like taking the time and like meditating and taking the block to just, breathe, be in the moment, just like don't let all those voices, get them out of there so that they don't infiltrate and cause more, physical damage.
That's right. And that's where the arts and where film and where, sort of songs and literature can all provide opportunities for us to teach that to people in a way that is not easy for them to reject. It's sort of they take it on board without having to sit there and accept sort of that they are learning anything. It's amazing the usefulness of literature in teaching people about human life, about how to deal with problems in human life. And the sadness of people not reading anymore is really problematic because they're not getting that. And film can do that as well, and that's something that your little film has actually provided a space for women and men and anybody watching it, whether they're transgender or whether they're, sort of living in that sort of husband-wife stereotypical sort of relationship. They can still see that there is this option where you can say something in a safe way and get some help.
And that's also relevant to the whole issue about sexual consent. Is, lots of boys get themselves into trouble by wanting to dominate at that point because they're not actually verbal enough often to, explore that. They feel awkward sort of going, are you okay with this? Because the programming in a sense that we get is you should be sexually aggressive. It's like, really? And that can go really astray.
Well,
especially, sorry?
Even in trust, like even in a relationship, this happens so much in relationships too. It can happen in, these situations with teenagers and all of that, but it can happen in safe, committed relationships. I mean, the word consent always is thought of, I feel like, in these dating kind of world, like the world of dating, right?
Yeah.
People don't talk about the word consent in marriages and in committed relationships because it's still just as important.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I think a lot of people have forgotten that one of the gains of feminism was to have that articulated that just because people are in a relationship or married doesn't mean they have to consent to having sex with their partner, whether their partner demands it. And that's very much a part of that whole domestic violence process, isn't it? That, the respect for each other, which is eroded through dominance and control and coercion. Yeah.
And guys, as we're starting to we're in our final part of the hour here to wrap it up, but it's such a great discussion that we're able to have a little bit of time. I have a couple little questions here that I'm just going to interject. They're just kind of coming in. One of them is a couple of people are asking, about strawberry cake, and they want to know, I know it's on the festival circuit, but where they can maybe see it or watch it, whether it's virtual or not. If you guys could tell us a little bit about that, where they could maybe see it, because there's a lot of interest here that want to learn a little bit more.
Well, absolutely. It is in the festival circuits, but it's also, we streamed it live on the webpage. So you can go, it's on our Facebook page. And actually, Ashley, if you want to say some things, I'm looking it up right now. I apologize, I didn't have that.
No, it's ready. Great. You know what brings it full circle is that this all, I wasn't going to use the word, but we're using it now, so I'm using it. Facebook is where it all started, and it's where it all came together. Is we wanted to stream it there because that's where really where we where the idea kind of grew from, and that's So on our Facebook page we do that, and then different festivals right now.
The page is facebook.com/Strawberry Cake Movie NYC.
Okay.
And
I couldn't find it.
My.
Yeah, well, it was because I actually didn't use the thing the way that you described it just then.
I mean, he did watch it via the private link, but we want to know if there was a public link where people could watch it. And Myrna or Ashley, if you could put it in the chat comments, that URL, and then I will actually copy it over to our listeners after the show, so that way they can see it, just in case they didn't miss it on how to get there. So if you just put it in the chat, and then I'll just copy it over, that would be great.
No problem.
The other question is kind of not really on topic, but it is in a way. Our show is called Inspire Change, and I think it's Ronia. I'll just say her first name just for anonymous reasons. Had a question about, is it possible to inspire too much change? And maybe that's a good question, actually, because we are Inspired Change. It's about making the world better, and that's what our show is. But then you also hear the word change a lot, like in a political arena, or you hear it sometimes in a negative connotation. And I think that's maybe where she was asking that. And so I wanted to bring that to the table as well from one of our listeners.
Okay. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead, Gunter, please.
That is actually a very, very good question, because I deal a lot with what I call change fatigue, especially within the context of organisations where they have this rolling restructure, resizing, people coming and going, and different expectations about performance, about relationships and so on. So yes, people can burn out from, attempting too much change. There's a personal thing with that too, where I go, one of the things that I feel is very present in our society at the moment is that individually a lot of us don't feel good enough. And the emphasis on constantly making changes reinforces it. So we start to develop a sense of anxiety. And my thing about change is the first cab off the rank is I need to look at myself and how do I want to be? Not because someone else wants me to be that way, but how do I want to be? What are my, values, and what's meaningful for me in my life, and, do I construct a purpose? And if that means, elevating my consciousness, i.e. becoming more emotionally expressive and more empathic, I'm on the right track. And in fact, for me, it's that simple. So I have a better relationship with myself and a better relationship with the people in it, because, physically wise, I'm going to live longer. It's actually true. We've got the statistics. So that's really important. Now, do I want to make a change in my community? Absolutely. If I see that someone's getting mugged, I'm not going to stand by. I'm going to call the cops. It's not just about me individually. It's about me in my community, in my relationships. And that always has a flow on, because it makes me understand the bigger picture a bit better and what might be useful and where to go with that. So that's how I see it. So yes, fundamentally we can get rushed into change and that can burn us out. But at the same time, we can't afford to stay stagnant either.
So the